The regulation and the reputation, particularly the reputation problem, is because the industry has a communication problem. It's not able, or it hasn't been up until this point, to communicate the benefits of short-term rentals. A lot of people think that it's just about big anonymous platforms, but actually behind every stay that you have, normally there's either a small business owner or an owner that is part of that story. The future of hospitality is hospitality. It isn't about just AI agents doing everything or totally autonomous properties, although that is also part of it. But the future is still around providing an experience, providing a feeling, providing a great service. There are unique challenges to short-term rentals, vacation rentals that other lodging doesn't have. So I think that what we've seen, particularly in the last 10, 12 years or so, is
property management at scale is about more than just rent rolls and maintenance calls. It's about protecting your assets, delivering stellar guest experiences, and scaling operations without losing quality. Welcome to Minute by Minute, a show where industry leaders share unfiltered stories, proven strategies, and real solutions for operating at scale. I'm your host, Nils Mattisson, CEO of MΗNUT, and together we will dive deep into what it really takes to keep your properties safe, efficient, and protected. Let's get started. Today I'm joined by Jessica Gillingham, founder and CEO of Abode Worldwide and host of the Pillow Talk Sessions podcast. Jessica runs one of the most respected communication agencies in the hospitality tech space, working with technology brands and enterprise operators. She wrote the book Tech-Enabled Hospitality, Strategies to Elevate Guest Experience and Operational Efficiency, which draws on interviews with 38 senior executives across 13 countries and is shortlisted for the Business Book Awards. In this conversation, we explored why the STR industry's reputation problem is really a communications problem, why every leader she interviewed for her book on hospitality kept returning to the same conclusion about people, and what she means by the hotelization of everyday real estate. Jessica, welcome to Minute by Minute. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Niels. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, as always, when I talk to you.
Likewise. And you've spent your career helping hospitality tech companies tell their stories. How did you end up in this niche?
Yeah, so an interesting question. And I actually haven't been helping tech companies my whole career, but I have been in travel my whole career. And there's a long story to this, and then there's a short one. And I think to save your audience, I'll stick to the short one. I started my career in Canadian travel and found my way into cottage rentals in Canada and working. And I actually had my own travel platform that sold to British guests the kind of the concept of the cottage holiday in Canada. And this was around the time that Airbnb was coming out. Airbnb was still shared homes and urban places, not kind of leisure place. So I had this travel business at first, but at the same time, I also, in order to pay the bills, worked in PR, and I actually worked in deep tech PR, and I worked for an electronics specialist PR agency. So I sort of learned two things at the same time. One was around travel and hospitality. The other, which was sort of diametrically opposed, was all about deep tech, semiconductors, and how to communicate very complex technology kind of solutions. And I guess a sort of a natural fit was marrying the two together. And at the same time, there was an awful lot of tech investment coming into the short-term rental space. Of course, because of Airbnb, there was a lot of innovation, like you guys with MΗNUT, coming in to solve challenges for professional property managers. So it was almost like I was just in a good place at a good time and had the right skills and mindset to bring the two things together or three things really: communications, tech, and hospitality together. It was a sort of a lucky accident, if you like.
I often find that those lucky accidents happen when you combine two things that are maybe not so common to combine at a given time. It makes one quite unique and well positioned to take advantage of these things that are happening in the industry. And of course, you are now one of the leading voices in the industry. And you've said many times that the short-term rental industry has a communications problems as much as a reputation and regulation problem. What do you mean by that?
So I think they're hand in hand, actually. So the regulation and the reputation, particularly the reputation problem, is because the industry has a communication problem. It's not able, or it hasn't been up until this point, been able to communicate the benefits of short-term rentals. We know all about what we hear from the press around, disrupting housing shortages, disrupting local communities, the bad Airbnb guest, those sorts of things, not paying taxes, etc., etc. But actually, that's only a very small part of the story and not even the real truth of the story. So what the industry as a whole has, it's not been able to really communicate the value, the positives, the actual real impact that short-term rentals, professional short-term rentals, can bring to communities, to economies, to tourism in an area, and also individual small business owners as well. So that's one level of the communication problem. But I think also that, and that's more from, I guess, the sort of the operator and the sort of the general industry stance. But if we look at the tech companies as well, there is quite often a vanillaization of value proposition of tech companies where they all kind of can sound and look the same, and it's not always clear what category they're in or what's kind of unique about a particular company or a particular solution that they're providing. So it's probably those two things is what I often mean when I say that.
Who are some of the players in the industry that are perhaps doing it better than the rest of us?
So that is a really good question. And I think that what we're starting to see is some brands from the operator side having a real kind of a unique position and point of view about what they're offering. And one that does come to mind is actually Bob W. as being a brand that has a very sort of unique feel to it and a unique kind of proposition, if you like, of being that hybrid hospitality. That I would say is one that's able to kind of communicate. And it's not a traditional vacation rental, it's more like the short stay hybrid, but that might be one as well. And then there are a number of tech companies that are able to differentiate themselves. And it's always a journey. A tech company goes on a journey. And as you know, all businesses change shape as they sort of, move and pivot and try different things and enter into new markets. But there are a number of them that do get that bit right. I probably won't name them because that might be a bit unfair to some of our clients and things, but there are a number that are able to communicate that as well. I think the associations are really also taking it on board around communicating the value of the industry as well. And not just in policy to governments and lawmakers, but also to the public as well. They're really doing a lot of effort. I mean, it's difficult to do this. There's a lot of anti-short-term rentals, or traditionally has been. But I think that the associations, particularly VRMA, and then we've got STAA, and then we've got PASC also in the UK, and the Scottish Association as well, are really making great strides on communicating the value of the industry.
I noticed one, I'm sure you've seen it in London. There is a campaign from Asturias, the region in Spain, that has this slogan around respectful tourism. And I had to look it up. It's around embracing respectful tourism, and of course, like accompanied with beautiful images from Asturias. But they have a pretty comprehensive set of, I think it's like a code of good conduct for short-term rentals that they have adopted, and then they have sort of collaborated between the associations and the government. And I think it looks like a pretty good, it looks from the outside at least like a pretty good communications campaign. So maybe there is more there once the government and the associations can work closer together.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Nils, actually. Portugal, the association in Portugal, ALEP, has done a really good job of communicating the value of short-term rentals and working with lawmakers, policymakers as well. And they did some quite grassroots campaigns about looking at the actual people that are involved in property management. So I think a lot of people think that it's just about big anonymous platforms, but actually behind every stay that you have, normally there's either a small business owner or an owner that is part of that story. It's not, a conglomerate. Parts of maybe the distribution chain is, but it's not a conglomerate that is getting all of the benefit. There are, people like you and me that might have rental properties or that kind of thing that brings sort of needed investment and income to whatever a local community might have.
That's actually the first time I hear of something like that, but I can really see that working, because people can relate to people, right? We talk about in the tech industry, you want to have founder-led communication, like you want to have a face on the company. And of course, like most of our customers, they're small family businesses or individuals who have a passion for hospitality and want to run a small business. So I think that sounds like a great strategy to highlight them. And you also wrote a book recently where you interviewed 38 senior leaders across the industry and through many countries. I was honored to be one of them. What surprised you the most in this research? What did you learn?
Yeah, thank you, Nils. And it was a really interesting project to do. At times, it felt so hard to sort of pull it all together, figure out the threads, kind of do it. But now it's sort of come out and I realized sort of how important it was for me personally to actually write this book. And I think that there were several threads actually that I found most surprising. Now, I talk to people that I talk to a range of leaders. So from the tech side, like yourself, but also operations, and then also consultants. I also looked at the hotel space as well as the short-term rental space. So it was across hospitality, looking at lodging part of hospitality. And I really expected to hear a lot about technology. The book is called Tech-Enabled Hospitality. Like that's what my when I interviewed people, that was the sort of the take that I was taking. So I expected to hear sort of very much kind of tools or systems, that kind of thing. But actually everybody I spoke to, including yourself, really actually looked at it from quite a human perspective. And what's the impact of whatever technology we use today or that we could be using coming forwards has on either the operator and their team, those humans, or the guest, those humans. So I think that, and a sort of a leading phrase, if you like, that all of the leaders said is that the future of hospitality is hospitality. It isn't about just AI agents doing everything or totally autonomous properties, although that is also part of it. But that the future is still around providing an experience, providing a feeling, providing a great service. For either those that work in hospitality or those that experience it. So that was one thread, but also what really struck me as well is different ways of looking at hospitality as well. So one of the ways and themes that came through was around the different business models that there are in hospitality that you wouldn't necessarily traditionally think about hotels or short-term rentals. So that might be looking at co-working as part of the mix, or looking at student accommodation and how that can be short stays and that kind of thing. Also around that democratization, how technology is allowing even the smallest player, so maybe a small 3-unit short-term rental in the middle of India, can have the same access to solutions that Marriott in the middle of New York could have. So that's sort of, and which is wonderful for the short-term rental industry because it allows that competitive playing field that, a few years ago wouldn't have been available. The cost inhibition as well as the sort of the tech knowledge to deploy this sort of thing. But because we've got solutions like yours and others across, pricing, property management, guest communication, business intelligence, anyone can have access to that and run run a professional hospitality operation. So those were just some of the themes that came through from my research, and then also the book itself.
I think the short-term rental industry is actually quite far ahead when it comes to tech adoption, and I think partly it's necessity. Like it's more difficult to run a distributed property management company compared to an apartment hotel or a regular hotel where all of the rooms are within one building, and so I think that necessity has meant that a lot of these solutions have propped up, and the industry has been really good to adopt them and bring things forward. But do you see the flip side? Are there areas where the short-term rental industry actually thinks it's ahead, but it's actually behind the hotels and other asset classes?
I think that I totally agree that the short-term rental, maybe the way I see it as being ahead is in that innovation, because as you say, there are unique challenges to short-term rentals, vacation rentals that other lodging doesn't have. That distributed properties, for one, even things like the fact that every single unit pretty much has a different owner. You've got to have all those different relationships. Every property is unique, pretty much. So I think that what we've seen, particularly in the last, 10, 12 years or so, is innovation coming, and really smart people coming in and some of them from the property management side themselves saying, this is a real issue. How can we make this better? So, and I don't think you necessarily have that on the hotel side. Obviously you have independent hotels, but I think there's less operator turned tech in the hotel space. What I think, though, they are, and I do, my company does both. So we do short-term rental tech. We also do hotel tech. I think what is a difference is that the hotel tech perhaps has bigger customers that it looks after. Like it typically has customers that have sort of larger portfolios or a sort of a different relationship to guests. So one of the ways that I see the hotel space perhaps a little bit ahead of short-term rental is on the personalization piece and on the guest relationship piece. Whereas I think that in hotel, there maybe is a little bit more forwards on that side of things that in short-term rentals. And maybe that's also because of the way that short-term rentals are still maybe typically through the OTAs rather than having that direct relationship. But I see hotels as leading a little bit further on that, the relationship and maybe even the guest experience using technology there.
Yeah, I think I can see that. Like the loyalty programs, etc. Like, and how when you go to one Marriott, like even if the next one is run by a completely different company, really, your profile sort of carries with you, right? And some of the personalization maybe lives with an umbrella that means you can get more personalized hospitality at a bigger scale. So that's good insight. And Jessica, I hear you have another book on the way. Can you talk about that theme?
Yeah, I will. Nils, can I just go back to that hotel piece as well? I think that also what the hotels are, they have more of a brand sense than short rentals have, which also deploys itself into native apps for guest communication in a way. And if they've got properties that are in different locations, that loyalty also is more likely to be there, that a guest would stay in London, or they might stay in New York at the same place, or they might stay in Copenhagen at the same place. So I think also that makes a bit of a difference on why I feel that hotels are a little further along there. But yes, the next book that is that I'm working on at the moment is I want to explore one of the themes that came out in the first book, which is around the hotelization of real estate. So looking at how hotelization, and by that I mean a sort of a focus on operations, a focus on experience, a focus on changing guest needs, and how that is infiltrating and changing other other sectors of lodging that aren't traditionally seen as hospitality, but are very much moving towards that kind of operating model. So that is in student living, or we're seeing it in build to rent and multifamily. We're seeing it in co-living. We're seeing it in flexible stays. And then, of course, we're seeing it in apart hotels and serviced apartments. So that blending that we're seeing, we're also seeing it from the other perspective, how hotels are moving into more and more into branded residences. That is an area that is having a lot of fast growth. A lot of capital is coming in. So I feel that for me, it's been for a number of years now, a really interesting kind of convergence that's happening, but also a trend that's happening and a change that we're seeing. So I just really wanted to explore it. So that's what I'm doing.
I think that's something that we've seen the same convergence. We absolutely see the same convergence, but it's happening slowly compared to tech. And so when you're in tech day to day, it feels like, you gotta be on top of the latest Claude release, and then there's a new startup coming. And it can be hard to both follow the sort of day to day, very, very high paced, and then also see these broader trends that are playing out at a much longer timescale. So I'm looking forward to that. And maybe you can tell us already now, like this convergence between residential and hospitality assets, is this a good thing for the operators, or is it going to create new problems for the industry?
So I think fundamentally we can look at it both ways. But if we actually look at it as a positive, and at the Short Stay Summit, before the recording, we were talking about the Short Stay Summit, and I moderated a panel about flexible living. So this was very much the kind of the topic we were talking about, which is living and short stays. Where do they marry up together? And a key theme of that was that the living sector, residential, requires very different thinking than hospitality does. Like, you don't need to worry in a way about your tenants so much when this is prior to the Renters Reform Bill, but before, when they just signed a lease for 12 months. It's not like you're trying to generate new guest reviews every night, every week, like in the short stay sector. So having to focus on experience, and there's that side on one level, like how does a tenant or guest feel? What's the experience for them? But also the challenges of hospitality with turnovers, nightly. You don't have to go into a residence property and change their bed, and change their sheets. Like, it's different. There are different challenges that you have. So what we're seeing perhaps more on the residential side is they're starting to look at hospitality and be like, we need people that know how to operate this. We need to know how to do all the complex things that are required in hospitality, whether it is because we're looking at doing flex, or whether it's that we're starting to see our tenants as customers and as guests in a way that traditionally hotels or hospitality would. So I think that there's an opportunity, and this is what my panelists that I had on in the conversation said, is there's an opportunity for operators to go in and operate in different building classes, and which is, makes total sense for asset owners potentially to kind of look at those models rather than try and figure it out themselves. So I think that it obviously supply will change, but I think that it can only be a good thing for the short-term rental sector, and particularly operators that see it as an opportunity, not as a competition or a threat.
So at the Short Stay Summit, you made an astute observation. I thought you said there was a lot more suits, a lot more business casual, and I think I was actually guilty. I think last year I had a shirt, and this year I had a blazer. What does that signal to you? Is this part of the same trend?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the same trend. And to me, it was really quite noticeable, sort of looking around, that people were more smartly dressed in the way that you might see at a living sector conference or a hotel conference. And what I think that signals two things. I think it signals that people coming from other industries and sectors, adjacent industries and sectors are coming because they're interested in what's going on in the short stay sector. But I think it also shows that the professionalization of short-term rentals is coming. Now, don't get me wrong, if someone wears a sweatshirt and a t-shirt, doesn't mean they're not professional. But if we look at this as a general trend, it's that it's attracting operators, investors, developers, people from different sectors, as well as ones in short stay, that have an element of professionalism that perhaps hasn't always been part of the short stay sector. So it's just an observation, but it seemed like a really clear one to me.
All right, we'll see if it holds next year. I'm gonna bring
Maybe
my
it's
blazer
fashion trends. It could be all of that as well, but that's the take I took on it.
Yeah, I mean, once I suppose is an anecdote, but then when it's happened a couple of times, it can be a trend. So at the summit, you moderated a panel, and it was around flexible living and how that impacts short stays. What is flexible living, and how does it relate to the short-term rental sector?
Yeah, so this was the panel I mentioned a little bit earlier, and flexible living doesn't actually really have a clear definition. So in some countries like Spain, flexible living is actually co-living, which is, everyone kind of not living together, but having community spaces in their buildings. Flexible living, typically, when we talk about it, and in this instance, is around looking at asset classes in a more flexible way. So looking at what might traditionally be a residential rental build to rent property, that then has flexibility to be short stays. It might have guests and tenants all in the same building staying for different periods of time, whether that's like one night or 12-month leases. So there's instead of seeing one building or operator that is delivering something to one type of customer, what we're seeing is operators and asset classes looking at customers differently than just a siloed group. So it's everything from student accommodation that becomes short lets in the summer to branded residences that are looking, as I said earlier, looking more like a hospitality offering as well. So and again, it's like, what are the trends for that? There's a mixture of trends. It's capital looking at how their investments can have different yields and more diversity of where they get their investment income from. It's also coming from guest trends, whether that is people, still remote working and wanting to travel and stay in different places, or people that are renting, like we're moving more into a rental experiential society. So there are different trends to it, but it's definitely something that is coming on the horizon. Now, I go to conferences that are in the living sector as well as hotel and short-term rental. A year and a half ago, they would never talk about hospitality in the living sector. Now they're starting to say, talking about hospitality models and looking at what's happening in hospitality sectors in a way they weren't necessarily before.
So alongside these new categories and perhaps the blending of different asset classes and the convergence that we've spoken about, alongside that, there's this massive disruption to search and how people find accommodation with ChatGPT and other large language models fundamentally changing the way people discover. So you've made the argument that when an operator isn't clear about who they are, isn't clear about what category they're part of, that they risk becoming invisible to these new types of search. How should hospitality companies be thinking about this right now?
So it's actually not just operators, it's tech companies as well. If you're not really clear in what category you are in and what your value proposition is and your messaging is, then you also either become invisible or you end up in a bucket that's not the actual bucket that you should be in. So I just say, on those two parts of that, I think with the operator, firstly, it's they have to have a direct booking strategy and a brand that they're, pretty much delivering against to be able to show up anyway in LLM. If you haven't got any of that, if you just happen to have a website, but you haven't done any of the content that's really important to it, you're not building a profile, you're not visible in any way, and you're not kind of really clear about what you are and for what type of guest, then I don't think you've really got much chance of showing up in LLM discoverability as it is now. It's all changing as well. And we're still kind of seeing, well, where do the OTAs fit in all this? And how do you actually book? But I'm not remiss, I don't think, in saying that the vast majority of people are either doing it already or will be very soon, researching their stays first and foremost on one of the LLMs, whether that is chat, whether it's Claude, whether it's just Google overviews. They're not doing what was traditional search, which will be either going on an OTA website or an OTA app or going into the, normal Google. So we're still seeing, it's happening so fast, the change, and we don't really know how it will play out. But what I do know is that if you're not really thinking about and investing in how you show up in LLMs, you won't be part of that, part of the deliberation process of whatever kind of buyer that is, whether it's someone buying a vacation rental trip or whether it is a property manager looking for a solution to a challenge that they have.
So perhaps it's amplifying a trend that was already happening, in that the amount of time that we as companies get to communicate what we do, I've seen that over my career get shorter and shorter and shorter, right? Like, so people go on your website and you have 15 seconds to catch their attention. And maybe a few years ago it was 30 seconds, and maybe in a prior era you had a few minutes. I don't know, that was maybe before my time. But the need for like a very clear messaging has perhaps always been getting more important as the attention available has decreased. And we've seen, and I don't know if this is just us or if this is the industry as a whole, but we see that people who come to our website who have first been on ChatGPT rather than like traditional Google search, they behave quite differently. They are already a bit more informed, and they are more likely to convert, and they stay a little bit longer. And so I think a challenge for us there, and maybe for everyone, is to make sure that the LLM is representing you in a good way, so that they come with like the right preconditions, because it's so much harder to change someone's opinion once they've already made it. So that's perhaps one we all have to figure out together.
100%, Nils. And we've actually done quite a bit of educating on this, and we've got some past webinars and articles absolutely about this. Because what, and you've just articulated it, but I might say it in a slightly different way, is that buyers are doing their due diligence elsewhere. So by the time they get to your website, they've probably already either decided on you or thought it's either you or X or Y. They're not kind of still thinking, who am I going to work with? Am I going to work with anyone? Am I going to buy anyone? Like, they already know what they want, and they've done the due diligence elsewhere. They're just coming to do the final proof positive. Is it quite right for me? So that's why making sure that the way that you communicate, that you're in the right category for you, that you're consistently communicating the right messages across all kinds of channels, to make sure that you're showing up when people are starting to think and search in a way that was very different. Because if you think, in, let's call it old-fashioned Google, you'd write something, you'd put a question or whatever, and you'd get a bunch of links, and you still had choice then. You still decided which one looked right. But when we search on LLMs, we get provided an answer. So in a way, we get provided a recommendation or this is what you should do, which is, it's a different kind of thing. It's not choice. It's actually an answer. And then we're not given all the other opportunities that we might have looked at to do that due diligence against. it's a really interesting time for buying B2B, but also, of course, on the consumer side as well.
So perhaps we're seeing a bit of concentration where a lot of traffic will go to fewer players because they have found the right way to communicate through the LLMs.
Mm-hmm.
Another educational piece that you did recently was the Abode Worldwide Investment Index, where you tracked, I think, $1 billion of investment into hospitality tech. Where is this capital concentrating, and what does that tell us about where the industry is going?
Yeah, absolutely. So our hospitality tech investment, which we actually do every year now, looked at the last 12 months of investment. So there were 40 deals that were public, were in the public domain of hospitality. And we looked at the kind of the narrative around it and what it might mean for the industry. The vast majority, perhaps not surprisingly, but the vast majority, I think it was something like $400 million went into the property management software. And then other software that it went into were also kind of on the operational layer. So what that sort of tells us is that it's that operational layer that the money is betting on is what's happening there. And of course, there was some AI companies that got investment as well. But that was sort of the main kind of takeaway, is that it was less the point solutions, but more the PMSs. And in fact, I mean, it will have already come out by the time this goes live, but we're actually having a discussion on a webinar about it this afternoon around the consolidation of tech and what that might mean for the industry as we see more and more of the money going into more and more of the bigger platforms.
That is definitely a trend that I am seeing as well, and I would wholeheartedly agree with. I think there has been a collapse in what it costs to develop software. And so I think the natural consequence of that is that the platforms become broader. And it might end up with maybe a less diverse ecosystem and fewer players than before. The PMSs have, of course, been sort of rolled up and merged for years, but we haven't really seen the same thing around the more narrow companies that are maybe specializing in something that is, for whatever reason, not sitting well in a PMS. And those companies, I think, could very well either start competing where previously they have been partners, or maybe even tighter partnerships can lead to some consolidation. So I think we'll see almost like a third level of platforms coming. So the first one would have been like the OTAs and the booking engines, and then you had the PMSs, and then there is a third relatively vague group of companies now, but I think that's going to consolidate and take a bit more of a firm shape. So interesting that you're seeing that already on the capital side. Speaking of Abode Worldwide, you run a fully remote team. How do you build a culture and a sense of togetherness when everyone is distributed?
We put a huge amount of effort into our culture and in towards building a team where people feel part of, they feel invested. They're very much integral to. So our team is really integral. Without our team, we don't exist. So both myself and I have a COO as well. We put in a huge amount of, like, basically invest time, money, thought into how we make sure that our remote team feels part of something. So it's everything from, we do meet up quarterly, team days, we go to events. Education is a huge part of what we do and a value for us. So our team knows what's going on in the industry because they go to events and or that's part of their kind of education. We use technology to make sure that we can communicate all the time. And I mean, we even have something called the Culture Club, where a couple of our sort of younger members think about ways that we can all sort of remotely be part of something. So whether that is active teams or whether it is book club or all those kinds of things, we put a lot of effort into it. I don't think you can have a remote team that is very successful without putting quite a lot of thought and effort into it.
And of course, you always need good leadership. What have you learned about remote leadership that surprised you?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, leadership is a journey, and you all know this as much as I. It's a journey. I don't know that we're necessarily, I mean, we will be born with certain character traits that make us probably more prone to leadership, but it's very much something that gets developed over time, or certainly has been in my case. And I think that probably one of the fundamentals is the work that you do on yourself, to work out where your blind spots are, or what bits you're good at, or maybe less good at. I think for me, communication comes down to it, which is, where we make sure that we communicate. And actually, one of our values is clarity. So it's actually in our 4 values, clarity is sort of like fundamental to how we communicate, either to each other or to our clients or to the broader, the broader ecosystem that we're in. It's making sure that we are really clear, engaged, and I think that's part of it. But I think one of the things about leadership that I've worked out is I have to show up as myself. Like, you don't need to know all the, ins and outs or whatever, but it's really important that I show up authentically and with integrity. And that, I think, has probably been one of the biggest lessons for me.
It is a journey, and you learn so much along the journey. So if you look at the journey with Abode, and you were starting it again today, what would you do differently in the first 12 months?
That's a really good question, and I'm not 100% sure that I would do anything too differently. Like, it took a while. Like, we're almost 10 years old now, and we for the first 3 years it was just me. So, I learned a lot in those 3 years. I did all the doing. I went to all the conferences. I read everything. I wrote everything. So I really got an embedded sense of the industry, of the problems, of the people. So I'm not sure there is actually much that I would have done differently. We weren't actually remote right away. Once I started hiring people, I did actually hire people in near where the business is based. I probably would have gone remote right from the beginning, because it just opens up so much potential for a company in terms of, the people that can come and work. So I don't know that there is any. I feel like that's a bit of a bad answer, Nils, but I think it's actually the truth.
I actually find it very interesting, because when I started MΗNUT, I was also alone for the first year. And that is definitely one of the things that I would do very differently next time, and to get the team on board sooner, because it's tough to be alone. So I admire that you did it for 3 years, I must say.
I've always invested in mentors or business coaches, like that. So even though I was very alone, and still as a leader, you're alone in many ways, I've always had that sounding board or that guidance. And different mentors. So that, I think, is something that for anyone starting out, that's what I would always, prioritize and invest in.
Final question: You've had a long and interesting career, and have come out as one of the leaders of the industry. Can you tell us an unexpected thing that's happened in your career? What's been surprising to you?
So the true answer here, Nils, is I never ever in my wildest dreams growing up thought I would write a book about hospitality technology. Like, it was never in my game plan. So I think that having that opportunity and that subject matter was never on my wish list, if I'm honest, but it was most definitely probably one of the rewarding things that I've done. Because apart from anything else, it was a challenge, and it's always good to overcome a challenge.
We can agree on that. Thank you so much for joining, Jessica. It's been an absolute treat to have you.
Brilliant, Nils. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Minute by Minute. If today's episode gave you fresh insight, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Share this episode with your team and follow us on social media to continue the conversation and exchange your own operational stories. To learn more about privacy-first property protection, visit Minut.com. Until next time, make every minute count to maintain your property's safety.